Good morning. Welcome to another FITA Museum Collection Conversation. I'm just making sure we're going live now. Hi, I'm Leigh Wishner. I am the FITA Museum Registrar and Social Media Manager, Digital Media Manager. It's a new role for me. All right, I just see that Laura has joined us, so I'm going to invite her. Okay, invite. There we go. Fantastic. And we'll just wait a minute for Laura to join us, and then we'll get started in a really exciting conversation about all things kimono. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning, Leigh.
So
Thank you
good
for
to
having
see
me.
you.
Yeah, you too.
Well, I wanted you to know I dressed for the occasion. It's kind of hard to see now that we're a split screen, but
Oh my
you
gosh.
know me.
I would expect nothing less. It's beautiful.
Well, welcome. We're having people join us, and I'm sure that some of them are your followers. But for people who don't know you, I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then we'll launch right into the meat of our subject matter today.
Awesome.
Laura Wong is a Los Angeles-based costumer and costume designer working in theater, film, and television. She specializes in sourcing for custom-made costumes, spending her days hunting LA and beyond for interesting fabrics and materials, which sounds pretty dreamy. Laura specializes in Japanese costume and textiles and has studied the subject extensively in Japan and in the US. Her research has included Tokyo street fashion tribes, textile traditions of Japanese minority populations in Okinawa and Hokkaido, and the role of kimono in contemporary society. In 2018, she completed her certification as a licensed kimono dresser and teacher with the Southern California branch of the Yamano School, which is based in Tokyo. After completing her license, she opened her own business, BoroBoro, where she sells vintage Japanese textiles and kimono with a goal to help make the culture more accessible. Her business is a natural extension of her work in film, combining her passion for unique textiles with her love of Japan and kimono. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Well, I just have to say we first met at a FITA museum opening for the annual Art of Motion Picture it was our Art of Motion Picture costume design
I believe
exhibition.
so, yeah.
It was like our last gasp before the pandemic struck. And you stalked me down because I happened to have been wearing a vintage Haori to
Yes,
the
it was
opening. And
beautiful.
you were
I
like,
had to know.
can
Like,
I,
who is
t-
this
can I,
person?
can I, yeah, can I take a photo with you? Can I take a photo of you? I'm just launching my business. So it was a chance encounter, and we've stayed in touch, and I followed your business and watched you grow and flourish, and also the trials and tribulations in your industry. I learn a lot from you. So why don't we start off by you telling us what is kimono? And I also want to hopefully you can incorporate your personal journey to becoming a certified kimono dresser into this storyline of the history of kimono. So
For
take it
sure.
away.
Well, so kimono is the national dress of Japan. Literally, it means, so ki is the root of the verb to wear, and then mono means thing. So literally, it's thing to wear at its very basic level. But kimono, as we know it, is kind of a garment that falls under a broader umbrella of something called wafuku, which is wa is Japan, and then fuku is clothing, so Japanese clothing, traditional clothing. So what we
Okay.
think of as the kimono is really basically a T-shaped garment that is wrapped around the body um, with squarish or rectangular sleeves,
Mm-hmm.
you know, constructed with straight seams. And it's actually made out of one long bolt of cloth. I pulled one out because I was people might
Oh,
like to see.
great.
Basically, this is what's called tanmono. So it's a bolt of kimono cloth. It comes in a roll like this, and basically, traditionally they were all made to measure. So they're cut into prescribed rectangles and sewn together with straight seams out of one bolt of cloth. So each one is very unique.
Wow.
Um, Approximately 12 to 14 inches wide. So kimono fabric is actually quite narrower than Western fabric that we're accustomed to, and it's very no waste. So there's no, excess
Right.
cutting of the cloth beyond what's necessary, and any additional cloth is actually just hidden inside the seam allowance. So it's really smart and efficient way to create a garment. These days, of course, you see like ready to wear versions as well. Not everything's necessarily hand tailored
Mm-hmm.
to measure, although that certainly still exists too. They're worn with a wide belt around the waist called an obi, which there's a lot of different styles of, depending on formality, different types
Just
of
in case
fabric.
people, I was just going to say, just in case people want a
Oh yeah,
visual,
please.
here's a kimono. If you've never seen one before, I'd be really surprised, but this is what Laura was just describing. And I'll just show really quickly an obi or two from our collection, which are just really beautiful. This is a obi with a brocaded crane pattern, really, really detailed, sumptuous. And then this is another one that I happen to really love because it's so bold and stark. It just looks like black and gold stripes, but what it really is bamboo. So you get sort of the aesthetic.
Beautiful. Beautiful pieces in the collection. Yeah, so it really runs the gamut. There's very casual kimono, there's very formal kimono. I would say there's probably like 6 main elements that can be conveyed by the various details of a kimono. So the first one is pretty straightforward. It's life or death. So you always wear the collar crossed left over right unless the wearer is deceased. That's a super important one. Very embarrassing faux pas to do that one wrong.
And I will say you learn that if you work with kimono in the museum field quickly. Somebody will point it out to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank goodness somebody will point it out to you because it is a serious distinction.
Yeah. So actually the only way that you would have the collar cross the opposite direction would be if the wearer is deceased. So there's actually specific kimono just for burials. White is very significant. It's a color that's usually, worn by the deceased, or actually it's also worn in weddings by the bride. So it's like a very associated with purity kind of color. Another component of kimono is gender. It's a very gendered form of clothing, unfortunately, in our modern times. I wish there was some more crossover with that, but there are a lot of ways to tell the difference between men's and women's kimono. One big signifier is the sleeve shape. So women's sleeves tend to be a little bit more rounded in the outer corner, whereas men's kimono, they'll have a more squared sleeve. And women's kimono also have an opening underneath where the armpit is, which is actually necessary for how it's dressed on the body, whereas men's does not.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a man's kimono, just pointing that out. It's sewn to the side.
Yep.
And very square and boxy. Okay.
Absolutely. The reasoning for the opening under the armpit for women is actually because when it's dressed on the body, there's a fold. Let me see. I don't know if I have an image of it, but there's a fold called ohashori, which is basically underneath the obi, you see a little bit of folded cloth underneath. And in order to create that, you need that opening underneath the armpit.
Okay.
Yeah. Women's obi are much wider than men's obi, so you need that space.
That's really interesting. Okay, so that explains a lot about why these are always pendant, as we would sort of describe them. And I know you're going to lead into a discussion of some of the different signifiers, even in women's dress. So why don't I let you start with that, and I'll bring up aids as I can.
Yeah, for sure. So another main component with kimono is formality or occasion. We learn in kimono school TPO, which stands for time, place, and occasion, because especially the way modern kimono is today, it's very much associated with special events. So it's very critical to dress appropriately to the occasion, as you would here as well. Right. But there's varying kind of ways you can tell how formal kimono is or how casual it is. So for example, if you see a kimono like the one you just had up that has a pattern that goes all the way over the, so see how the pattern crosses the whole kimono? That would probably be considered a casual kimono. That one's a little borderline, but basically like this is a howdy, but if this was a kimono, because the pattern goes all the way across, it's casual. Okay. You'll also see sometimes kimono that are solid color. They can have a solid pattern woven into it, but if it's solid color, that's generally considered semi-formal. It's called iromuji, which means plain color. Sometimes you'll see a little family crest. So, I have some visual aids behind me. Sorry. This is an example of a family crest. on a kimono,
Mm-hmm.
that means it's formal. So they can either have 1, 3, or 5 crests. 1 crest would be more semi-formal, whereas like 5 crests would be very, very formal.
Okay.
They would be at the center back of the neck and on the
Mm-hmm.
sleeves is where you'll see them.
Okay. Right.
So for formal kimono as well, the pattern is typically concentrated kind of on the hem and on the sleeves of kimono. Now this is for women's kimono.
Okay.
As well. So that's another indicator.
I'm just going to show you an example from an exhibition we did a couple years ago.
Yeah.
This is a wonderful furisode in our collection that we had displayed. And I think it illustrates the principles you're just describing now, which is a concentration, placement of motifs in strategic places towards the hem and the bottoms of the sleeves. And what kind of a kimono is this?
So a furisode, which literally means swinging sleeves, it's the very long sleeves. That's a formal kimono for an unmarried woman, basically. So when you would get married, you would wear a version of a kimono that has shorter sleeves that would be called tomesode, which is kind of more your standard sleeve length.
Okay. Wow. Gosh, we're getting a crash course here.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover, you know?
It is. So I'm going to let you continue on in your flow. Go.
Sure. So another thing that is very important in kimono is seasonality. So seasonality is a big part of Japanese culture in general. It's considered very fashionable to dress like slightly ahead of the season. And nature motifs are very popular with kimono. So for example, it would be very chic to wear a kimono with cherry blossoms on it, like just before they bloom. You know, so that you're just like just ahead of the trend kind of thing.
Oh,
now you have to have a sizable collection to be able to dress in said manner all the time, but it's something to consider. There's different weights of fabrics for different seasons. So in the summertime, you'll actually see a lot of sheer kimono that you have to wear with summer weight undergarments. So it's like it's a whole thing. You've got to have a lot of different things. Whereas like lined kimono are more for winter. So there's certain rules about what can be worn when, but generally sheer always will tell you it's for summer.
Right. And would that also correlate with cotton versus silk?
To some extent, there actually are cotton kimono that are lined that can be worn during the like fall winter season too. So material isn't quite as much of an indicator as whether or not it's lined and how thin the fabric is. But because, for example, there's also actually wool kimono that are not lined, but that can be worn in the winter. So it's like there's a lot of like rules, but there are also a lot of things that can be kind of good.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. Another thing, let's see, age we sort of touched on, like furisode are for unmarried women. Another thing is that younger women tend to wear brighter colors. And older women, it's more traditional to wear more subdued colors. Now, of course, personal taste and style also, you know, comes into effect with this too. So there are people who totally buck all of these rules and do whatever they like. And it's really just a matter of personal style, which I think is very interesting. But I guess if you were to like generalize about what tradition is, it would be, you know, that's why you would see furisode that are super bright and flashy and have gold and all kinds of stuff. And then you'd see older women maybe wearing more subdued patterns.
Okay, fantastic. So a furisode like I showed that was black, with that would be more formal, but you could still have the long sleeves, the swinging sleeves, and have it be really bright and flashy, and that would still be not necessarily formal. Is that right?
That black is considered quite formal. So that one I would say is probably a formal piece. I will say the black furisode would probably be very popular during that time period. I think the one you have is like Art Deco period. I believe. Yeah. But certainly the arrangement of the pattern and the boldness of the pattern would make it quite youthful, even if it's black and it's under.
Okay, I understand. We're starting to delve deep into the sort of, well, it could be this or it could be that, but what is another factor that you would like us to know about how to get dressed in kimono?
Sure. There are a lot of pieces involved that you don't ever see. I think that's something that isn't always clear. So the quote unquote ideal shape, I suppose, according to kimono schools, people who, you know, want to promote kimono as a traditional art now. I think the ideal shape, quote unquote, is like basically a cylinder. So it's, you know, people's bodies aren't necessarily shaped that way. So there's a lot of things that go into it to create that shape, regardless of what your actual body shape is. So like, for example, myself, like my hips are wider than my waist. So I actually have to wrap my midsection with towels in order to get a non-wrinkly kind of look.
Okay.
Which, you know, fun fact, you wouldn't know that people are just wearing a bunch of towels underneath the kimono, but that's very common. There's a lot of dressing tools. So like here, I pulled some out. This is called himo. So it's basically just a muslin tie. This is what's used to tie the kimono around the body. Clips, kimono clips. Fun fact, these are from my school. Shout out to Yamano.
Oh, wow.
Clips are used to keep like your collar in place while you're dressing. They're used for a whole bunch of things, but they make these special ones with this rubber grip inside.
Okay.
Especially for kimono. To keep your collar straight, this is a plastic, it's called erishin.
Wow.
It's basically a little insert that goes inside the collar to keep it real nice and flat and straight.
Okay.
This is datsejime, which is a belt that you tie around the kimono once you've got everything in place. It kind of holds it in its final spot.
Okay.
Obi makura. It's basically a little pillow with ties. Okay. And there's a very common obi knot that looks basically like a drum, like a taiko drum. It's called the taiko musubi. So it's just a square basically in the back of the body, and this makura is used to make that shape. Okay. Let's see what else we've got.
I'm fascinated knowing all the things
obi
that.
Yeah, it's a stiffener for the front of your obi so that it's smooth and nice. Those are the main ones. There's like an infinite number of other things you can use to create a nice kimono shape, but those are probably the most basic, most common ones.
And do women nowadays wear traditional Western undergarments like bras and panties, and then
it totally depends on the person and their preference. So yeah, honestly, sometimes I like to wear a Uniqlo tank and leggings if no one's gonna see. You know, it's, you know, the dry check, whatever it's called. It's very comfortable. But they also do make specific, like they have kimono bras, they have specific kimono underwear. There's like a kimono slip that I had to buy for my school that's ironically called lingerie, even though it looks like some sort of, you know, very conservative underwear from the 19th century or something. Yeah, there's all kinds of undergarments that are traditional and then more modern takes on it. Like I've seen for men especially, they have basically it's a t-shirt with the collar that's stitched on. So it looks like a proper under kimono, but it's actually a t-shirt. It's pretty cool.
That's great. Fantastic. And I think people think it might just be one kimono that you wear, but can you talk a little bit also about like layering and what decisions go into layering?
Sure. Well, so the traditional kimono undergarments would be like either kimono bra, or sometimes you just wrap like very plain weave cotton as like a binder around your bust, because it's not supposed to be too curvy in the area or it makes weird wrinkles. So you wear that. Then there's like a kind of a chemise camisole that you would put on top. Then you would wear either there's 2-piece or 1-piece juban, which is a basically under kimono. That is very important to get that part right, because the way you set your collar on your under kimono will basically affect how it looks in the end. If it's off kilter or not, you know, set correctly, it'll come back to bite you later. So you put on your juban with all of these accessories that I've been showing you, and then the proper outer layer of kimono goes on top. On top of the kimono goes the obi belt. which there's many, many different styles and formalities of that as well that we probably don't have time to go into. And there's so many different ways you can tie them as well, depending on, you know, casual styles, formal styles. The fun part for me with kimono is really kind of getting to play with all the combinations you can make. Like, for example, a single kimono can make many, many different outfits if you pair it with a different obi. And, you know, depending on what you pick, it can convey a very different image. So there's also accessories, you know, that go into it as well. Some are decorative, some are more functional. But the fun part, it makes it kind of like collage, or, you know, putting together a piece of art, because you're basically making all these little choices that add up to a big final image. But within all that, there's so much creativity.
Wow. Well, that appeals to me, definitely. All the pattern combinations, color combinations, the style of obis, and I definitely sense that there are definitely more pop culture references nowadays as well. So that's kind of adding a little modern touch to things. I mean, the other day I shared a photo of a woman wearing the cat style obi. Oh my gosh, that's cute.
So cute.
But that has to be a more recent import, right? I mean, is that something that wouldn't be traditional?
I guess it depends on what your definition of traditional is. But yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is so fascinating about kimono is that I think there's an image, especially in the West, sometimes of traditional dress from other countries, that it's this kind of stagnant, fixed thing that has existed in this form and will always be that way and has always been that way. Whereas really, kimono especially is fashion. Like, if you look at the history of it all, it has not been the way it is now through time. It's evolved greatly through the years. And, you know, I think that's part of the fun of it, right? Is, you know, all the influences that get taken in and then interpreted in their own unique way.
Well, that gives us a really good springboard to having you tell us a little bit about the historic development of kimono.
Totally, yeah. My big time nerd subject. Thank you. I'll take the floor.
We all have them. We all have them.
So I think probably, you know, you don't have time to go into the whole history of Japanese dress.
Of course.
A good period to start with would be the Edo period, which was from 1603 to 1868. It's considered kind of the golden age in Japanese history, because it was a time of relative peace and prosperity. They were also closed off to the West at that time. So it was basically about 250 years where they weren't being influenced by, you know, outside nations, and it really allowed them to develop their like unique Japanese cultural traditions. So it's called Edo because Edo was the capital, which today we know is Tokyo. Okay. Basically, the people in charge were the Tokugawa shogunate. That was the ruling party at that time. They had really strict societal hierarchy. So basically, at the top, you had samurai, who were the warrior class. Then you had peasants, like farmers, people who labored, and then craftsmen, who were people who, obviously, artisans, people who made things. And then at the bottom, you had merchants. So it was actually kind of different from what we associate in the West, in Europe, because farming was seen as really noble work. You know, taxes were collected in the form of rice. So it was very, you know, critical to the economy and to, you know, being able to eat. So farming was actually quite highly viewed. Whereas merchants, because they weren't quote unquote producing anything, were kind of the lowest rank. Okay. But because it was kind of a period of peace, right? There wasn't as much need for the labor of samurai warriors. So it was ironic because despite their super high status, they were banned from farming or engaging in business. So it was quite difficult for them to actually make a living at the time. Whereas merchants, you know, since it's a time of peace, people have more time for leisure and recreation. They were making a ton of money because it was like everybody's, you know, in the city looking for things to do, looking for things to buy. So merchants became super wealthy, which caused some conflict because, you know, the samurai class is over there being like, we're technically higher ranking than you, but you're, you know, flaunting this wealth that you have that we're not able to have. So as a result, they put into place a lot of sumptuary laws, which if you don't know, are basically laws that are designed to restrict like extravagance and luxury, usually for like kind of moral or religious reasons. So this had a huge impact on textiles and clothing at the time.
Okay.
I think shibori would be a great example. I think you have a beautiful,
example.
Collection.
This is what you've identified as an under kimono, which I'm going to now update our database. But let me also give you a better close-up of this piece, because
so shibori,
once you get close up, you'll see.
Totally. So shibori is a form of tie-dye, where at the top you'll see all those little rings were created basically by taking thread and wrapping it around the cloth before it's dyed. So the parts that are wrapped by the thread remain white, and the part that touches the dye obviously turns red, which is a very, very labor-intensive process. This style of shibori that I'm highlighting now is actually called kumo shibori, and it's similar, where you pinch the thread and then you wrap it kind of in a spiral formation, which causes that kind of spider web effect. So shibori was very popular, very expensive, and so it became a target of these sumptuary laws. So basically they banned shibori, except for the upper classes. But as a result, what ended up happening is that they developed other techniques where they could get similar effects, but through technically a different method. So one of those methods that was invented during this time is called yuzen, which basically they would draw freehand in rice paste on the cloth before it's dyed. And then, you know, similarly, where the resist was, it would remain white. And then where it was dyed, it would take the dye. So yeah, that's a version of, this one's actually stencil dyed. So that's another.
Oh, that's, I'm sorry, I picked up the wrong one. I went with the faux shibori. I just thought,
yeah,
I was thinking in shibori. Let me get my yuzen. Hold on one second.
So
this is a better example.
Yeah,
of what you're speaking
that's
of.
A beautiful yuzen dye. So you'd see the white where the pattern is. That's where the rice paste would have been drawn on, and the blue is where the dye would have soaked into the cloth. So you can get similar effects to shibori, but through different techniques. So technically it was legal, even though it looks very similar. So katazome is a stencil dyeing technique, which is the other one that you showed, where basically a stencil would be created, and then the resist is applied through the stencil. Again, they'd use like a rice paste mixture for this as well. And, you know, it's a shibori-esque effect, but actually it's cheaper and easier to do.
Right. And then this one also has small examples of the faux shibori, the look for less.
Yeah. Yeah, you see it a lot. I have, let's see, this is a more recent one, but I don't know if you can see it. God.
Ooh, beautiful.
You see a lot of the faux shibori, even today. It's very popular motif.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So anyway, that's an example of something that was invented because of these laws. Another example is red and purple dye could only be worn by the upper class. They banned it for everyone else. But there was no ban on their use for linings and underwear. So you see a lot, even today, sometimes red linings and under kimono.
Okay. That was one of the questions. That was one of the questions we had asked earlier last week. Why are kimonos so often lined in red? But... Yeah,
you mostly see from the beginning of the 20th century. You see that a lot in women's kimono of the time, like a very fine kind of tissue, bright red silk. Traditionally the red dye was created with benibana is what it's called, but it's safflower plant. It's pretty distinctive.
I have actually a really good example. I'm just going to pop off camera for a second. Here is, this is a 1930s, I'm sorry, 1900 to 1930s example of an uchikake furisode, which we haven't touched on yet. You can see at the hemline, there's a peep of this red sort of very tissue weight silk that lines the entire piece. And can you tell us a little bit about the uchikake?
Beautiful. Uchikake, these days they're more associated for weddings, for bridal wear. There's like a whole specific type of, kimono that are worn for weddings, but uchikake is the outermost layer. So they tend to be very, very lavish, very embroidered. A lot of gold, you know, covered in auspicious motifs. I think that one you have pine and looks like possibly plum blossoms and tortoises. Tortoises, a very auspicious motif.
I have to show the tortoises because they're my favorite. I remember
They're so cute.
When I'm always attracted to pattern and design and motif history and symbolism, and I just have to show you what I call a hairy tortoise, and it's a very auspicious symbol of longevity, because you have to live in the water for a very, very long time to have algae and things start growing on your shell for this to get it to this long. This is a symbol of long life. Am I right? Or
Yeah.
am I wrong? Okay, good. I just want to make sure I remembered this correctly. But I always thought that was a really just a really unique symbol that we would kind of think is odd, perhaps, to our first glance, like, what is that? And that's why it's stuck in my mind, because it is such a perfect symbol of what you want in a marriage and in a life. So
yes. Yeah, there's certain motifs you definitely see on kimono for special occasions such as weddings, like
and cranes.
Yeah,
as well.
cranes. So cranes mate for life. So that's a reason they're often associated on wedding kimono.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, moving forward from the Edo period, what follows?
Yes. Oh, you know, there's one thing I would like to touch on regarding the Edo period, which
Sure.
is the Iki aesthetic. So Iki is basically a movement that started developing as a result of these suntory laws. So people were shunning more overt extravagance for very subtle extravagance. I think you have a men's howdy in your collection where you'll see, so for men's howdy, often the outside layer, as you see, are very subdued. You know, that one, it just has the family crests on the back, on the sleeves. But if you were to look inside, the lining is quite fancy. Yeah, I think you've got mountains and landscapes. So this is quite common. You even see this with modern day men's howdy, where it's very subtle on the outside, but on the inside, it's this like pop of, you know, beautiful, beautiful linings. So oftentimes this would be just as expensive as some sort of flashy jacket, but in a more covert way. So because people were being limited on what they could actually overtly show in society, these sorts of trends started happening, where the man who purchased it, as he's wearing it, he would know that he had this lavish lining inside, but it wouldn't necessarily show if he was out on the street. You know, maybe if he was inside and took it off, you would catch a glimpse of it, but not necessarily seeing it in your face, if you will. So like in Western fashion, I think you'll see like a swinging pendulum from kind of the bold and flashy to the more like subtle and subdued.
The truest luxury is the kind that only you know about. That kind of stuff.
But
yes, absolutely.
Iki, this like subtle style, is definitely a very central principle still when it comes to Japanese aesthetics. So that would be good to touch on.
So then what happens next?
Yeah, so after the Edo period basically comes to an abrupt close when Matthew Perry, the U.S. Navy Commodore, basically sails into Tokyo Bay and demands that they open up to trade with the West.
Demands, right?
Awkward. Yeah, so as a result of Japan opening in grand fashion to the West, basically this influx of Western culture starts pouring into Japan. Emperor Meiji adopts this saying called Bunmei Kaika, which means civilization and enlightenment, and basically embarks on this grand campaign to westernize. So they redid their military uniforms to be modeled after the French, because they researched all the uniforms in Europe and were determined that the French uniforms were the best, and all of this. They abolished all the class standards from previous periods. And you see this really interesting mixing of Japanese and Western influences, and especially in clothing as well. Men started adopting the Western style suit. And this is one of my favorite time periods, because you see, for example, like a man in a kimono, but with a bowler hat, or a woman wearing like a wool shawl over her kimono with like a Western style parasol or umbrella. It's just this very fascinating time of people mixing things, trying things out, seeing, you know, what works for them.
Right.
women took a little longer
Another
to.
chapter from a different point of view of this cross-fertilization of these meetings of culture and how they look at each other and decide what they like and what they want to try out.
Of
And
course.
it was certainly happening in the reverse in Europe and as well. So
Yeah. So you know, as Western goods start pouring into Japan, you also see Japanese goods starting to go to Europe, right? So basically it led to this like craze for Japanese goods called Japanisma. And kimonos became a specific kind of like style symbol, you know, for Europeans. So it's like a sign of status, of wealth, you know, a sign that you're kind of like a worldly person, right? You'll even see in like impressionist paintings of the time, a lot of paintings of Western women wearing kimono, like a bathrobe basically, or like ukiyo-e print, like subtly in the back of the painter's self-portrait, just to like signal that like, look, I'm a very cultured, worldly kind of person. It's quite interesting.
And that person may have owned or worn a dressing robe somewhat like this, which I showed. We looked at a little detail of it earlier for the Yuzen embroidery, the Yuzen paste resist and some embroidery. But this is one of our star pieces. It's an 1880s dressing robe. Now, the mystery for me, and I'm going to have to invite you to the museum to look at this piece. I know, twist your arm. What I would really like to know is, you know, we have it under the assumption that it was recycled from a pre-existing furisode. I also asked another friend of mine who's an expert in Japanese textiles, who said it's possible, but it's also possible that it was, you know, made from yardage that was intended for, you know, one of the bolts that you showed earlier. I don't have the patterning skills to look at this piece and identify whether or not the, which was true. You know, is it actually conformed to all the right specs for a kimono that was then dismantled into something else, or does it just have all the hallmarks of a Western garment and it was just made from the fabric that was imported? So this is sort of a fantastic object that illustrates exactly that, what you were describing in Impressionism and the Japanisme and how it swept Europe. And you start to see that companies come along well, I'll just show another one. Here's a fantastic, another fantastic dressing robe that we have in our collection. That's a star. It's also made from Japanese silk, embroidered in a wisteria pattern, which is absolutely just stunning in person. But also
companies like
Takashimaya. And can you tell us a little bit about that? I'm going to pull up our another.
Sure. Yeah, it's great to see the contrast between those two, because Takashimaya is a very famous Japanese company that was known for their beautiful kimono. And during this time period, once there started to be such a demand for Japanese goods in the West, they actually started producing quote unquote kimono robes that were specifically designed and created for the Western market. So you see a lot of unique kind of differences between the kimono that were intended to be worn as kimono in Japan and then these robes that you would see.
That's a giveaway right here.
Yeah, not a lot of tassels involved on Japanese kimono.
No, but a surprising number of the pieces that were made for the West have this extra superfluous trim, a lot on the sleeves, and then this is actually the back of the sleeve, and it sort of just is tacked on.
That's incredible.
Here is another giveaway for if you are looking at antique kimono and you want to try to figure out if they are authentic kimono or if something that was made for a different market. What do you see here?
That very puffy, lavish embroidery.
And also the thing that I learned as well, this looks, it has been folded in the past, so there's sort of like a impression there. But you notice that there is no center seam here.
Yep.
Which is, again, it means it was a continuous wide piece of fabric that was embroidered. this is a detail that would never appear on a traditional kimono. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's always the center back seam on kimono. And also another telltale thing is if there's actually like a seam along the top of the sleeve. You would not see that with a traditional kimono, but sometimes with these kimono robes, you do see that.
Right, because the panel that goes from the back would go all the way along the front. So and that's another thing that is also a giveaway, is that if a pattern is upside down on one side but right side up on the other, then you know it's been used as one continuous piece of fabric. That was
definitely.
Something.
And if it's the correct way up on both, even though there's no seam, you'll know that it was, you know, probably a little more expensive because it takes more forethought and planning to do it that way.
Oh, that's a good thing to keep in mind. So here's the label. I'm sorry, I put it out reversed, but you can see that a lot of these were clearly marked for a Western market. So, you know, that's another thing. You're not necessarily going to have too many questions if you find a garment that has a label in English within it.
Definitely, you won't see labels.
Labels are another giveaway.
Sometimes you will see like the signature of the kimono maker, but it's generally like on the bottom of the collar where it would actually be hidden when it's worn, and it's usually like either calligraphy or stamped or something like that. You wouldn't see like a manufactured label like that for sure.
Wow, cool.
But yeah, other things like the shiny fabrics, like the charmeuse type fabrics, you would not see that very often with with Japanese authentic kimono. Other things, that big embroidery. A lot of times another telltale giveaway is they'll have the lavish embroidery that goes all the way from the top to the bottom. Whereas if you think about it with, you know, when you wear kimono traditionally, you have obi that, you know, covers the entire midsection, right? So they don't usually concentrate much pattern in the middle because it's just going to be wasted. It's going to be hidden underneath the obi. Whereas if you're wearing this over an 1880s dress, of course, it will be very, very featured because there's no belt, right?
Right.
So that's another big telltale sign. Sometimes you get the more narrow sleeves because it's, you know, a lot of fabric, and some people didn't like that. Another thing is sometimes they're very padded, these tourist robes, because it's quite cold in most places in Europe, right? So
I have definitely noticed that with some of the pieces in our collection that are made for the Western market, they do feature all throughout the body padding. So yes, we got to keep warm in our in our different climates. But so in the Meiji period, we have some developments, and then how does that change when we start to get into the 20th century?
Definitely. So next would be the Taisho period, which was from 1912 to 1926. And this is actually probably my favorite time period because some of the textiles are the howdy that you wore that introduced us in the beginning is from this time period. Like, it's beautiful. Meisen silk is what it's called. So it's a form of silk where basically the threads are stencil dyed prior to even being woven. So it's a way for really complex patterns to be created, but in a way that's pretty affordable and pretty fast. So yeah, there's a beautiful one from your collection. It has this notorious kind of speed line effect, which is created because the threads are dyed before being woven. Yeah, right there.
And you see, sometimes they are double ikat. Sometimes there's, well, I mean, it's, again, I'm using the generic term ikat to refer to a resist dyed fabric that the pattern is only appears as it's being woven. It's not printed after the fact. It's dyed before the weaving. So it results in these naturally blurred edges. And that's a intentional and desirable effect. It's not a mistake. And sometimes you can tell if it's double if the lines are going this way and this way. That's how you can tell usually. So I know a lot of people have asked before, how can you tell if it's double or single? And that's your giveaway, is if you can see that blur going in both directions. So
yeah, Mason's my absolute favorite textile ever.
Me too.
Me too. From my collection that I could show. So you see a lot of influence of Western motifs as well. So this one's a very cool kind of Art Deco, like triangle pattern. then I have this pretty cool one I just got as well that has like a rose print that's very much in a Western style. Another Western style floral here. You'll see it's a little more realistic than some of the other, more traditional types. And then this one's my prize possession that I will never give up. It's actually, I don't know if you can see it, but it's got palm trees.
Oh,
it's so wild. It's like, there it is upside down.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's like palm trees in a sunset.
Well, it is interesting to point out. I mean, I looked at that and I said, oh, well, that's perfect for Hawaii. But it is interesting to note that the first Aloha shirts, as we know them today, were actually made from Japanese printed crepes and also these types of kimono materials that were abundant and being imported into Hawaii. And so we owe a great debt to Japanese traditional fashion, to our, if you love them, then you're really happy. that happened. But yeah, so here is, I just wanted to show again, this is the haori I was just showing a detail of. And what is a haori again? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a haori is basically a kimono jacket. So it's intended to be worn over a kimono. It's functional in that it's to keep your kimono clean, and it's also fashion as well, because it can be fun to kind of mix and match the different styles and textiles with whatever your kimono is as well. So it's a functional and fashionable piece.
And it became fashionable in the Art Deco period as a sort of that cultural exchange between what women were wearing in the West and what Japanese women were looking to at the West, and then back and forth. One thing that is found on haori typically are these decorative ties.
Yeah, so those are called haori himo. They're little cord ties that can be, tied in the front in a variety of different ways. It's kind of optional. You don't have to tie it. You can tie it. You don't have to. But there are definitely some very cool types of haori himo out there.
And a lot of these were worn by the moga.
Yes,
tell us about the moga.
So I printed a couple pictures of. So this is like such a fascinating phenomenon. So basically the moga, it's like an abbreviation of modern girl. And it's basically like the flapper type girl who embraces Western style and gets her hair permed and goes out on the town. This time period, you see a lot more women joining the workforce. So as a result, they have more disposable income, and with more disposable income, a lot more, money that they could spend on things like fashion. So this like boom in mass produced, fun, brightly colored kimono kind of coincides with this, boom of women joining the workforce and wanting to spend their money on, things that make them happy, etc.
Right.
Which certainly makes me happy,
And something that's fascinating about that period as well, and it will resonate with people nowadays, is that the meisen kimono and haori are generally almost like an equivalent of fast fashion. They were mass produced, as you said. It's the kind of fabric that was easy to churn out, and therefore you could have faster fashion cycles and different like popular cultural motifs that would come in, and they were more affordable. And it also stems from the earthquake. There was an earthquake in Japan that kind of like stopped production. Am I remembering that?
There's like a story I've heard where there was a great earthquake. I believe it was in the 20s. I don't know exactly the year, but the Great Kanto earthquake, where the story I heard was that there was a department store where like the exit from the store was blocked, so a bunch of women had to like jump from upper floors to try and escape, which because of the fires and such. And this is kind of a depressing story, but what I heard was that women are having to jump from upper floors, and because of the way kimono are, like they would have a bit of a unseemly amount of exposure as they're falling, whereas with Western clothing it might not have been quite so exposing. So apparently the story I heard was that as a result of that, more women started to adopt Western clothing. I don't know if that's true, but
I don't know if that's true either. But I do remember learning that there was a disruption. I mean, besides the societal disruptions of war, etc., there were also production changes in terms of how the fabrics were being manufactured.
Mhm.
So that brings us sort of to the war and post-war and to today. And I want to make sure we give enough time to hear how you got into
Okay.
this. So,
Yes.
go!
That little thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. So World War II obviously was, so the next time period is the Showa period, which was from 1926 to 1989, which is a broad range. A lot happened during that time. But the beginning half, yes, was definitely basically, World War II. And materials were rationed, including fabric. So all the flashy clothing, permed hair, all the, trends of the previous era kind of went out the window, of course, as things got increasingly dire. So this is really the last time period you see where kimonos really daily wear. Basically what happens is, like, after the war, there's like kind of a time period where a lot of people had to sell their kimonos for food. It was a very bleak time, of course. So you don't see a lot of the like fashion-y sort of aspects. One type of clothing that became prevalent during the war is called mompe. It's basically a type of wrap pant that a lot of women took their old kimono and kind of upcycled into these pants because they needed to be able to work in the fields and do things that you can't necessarily do in, proper kimono. So a lot of kimono got turned to that purpose. But after the war, basically in the 50s, 60s, once Japan started to kind of recover more, what you would see is this phenomenon of kimono schools. So, prior to that time period, you would learn how to wear kimono from your family because it was everyday wear. But as it became less common, there was this need for people to learn how. So, of course, kimono schools were a great answer to that. But as it became more formalized, there's kind of like a standardization that took place. Like I said earlier, the kind of like column-like shape and like not wanting to have any wrinkles whatsoever, like all of that kind of came out of the post-war period. Whereas if you look at pictures of women dressed in the 30s, there's wrinkles. It's everyday clothing, so it's not like you had to look perfect at all times necessarily. Whereas there's kind of a pressure at times now to do that. I have a kimono magazine from the 60s. I collect kimono magazines that I like. If you follow my account, I like share
it's great
from, just because I think it's so fun to see the different time periods. So yeah, you'll see 1960s, very 60s vibe happening here, but look, they're like perfect. They're so perfect. Everything's in its right place. No wrinkles.
Interesting.
That sort of thing. So yeah, it's like they've almost leaned into the impracticality a bit now, because modern context of kimono is really more special occasion oriented. There aren't as many people who wear it every day so much. Even in Japan, it's more like for special occasions, like you get married or you coming of age day, things like that, where it's like you wear a kimono for that occasion, but you don't necessarily wear it like to lunch. And certainly there are people who do, but it's just less common now. So yeah, it's become more like standardized.
And this is something I'm sure that, I mean, I would like to know the answer to, but I'm sure that our audience would also like to know. What role do geisha play in style setting and trend setting?
Sure. Well, in the Edo period, there were very much trendsetters, like that phenomenon of iki that we talked about. Geisha were very instrumental in sort of creating that iki aesthetic. I actually watched a great lecture yesterday on advertising during the Edo period. And it was interesting how like geisha and also kabuki actors were really like used in advertising to promote products. Like apparently during kabuki shows, it wasn't unusual for a kabuki actor to come out midway through and be like, hey, you should try this, this skin cream or whatever. Like, just like you would have a commercial on TV right now,
Paid promotion.
Yeah. Geisha are known to have very beautiful kimono, and I think they've definitely through the years in different capacities had a great influence on fashion for sure.
Okay, well that's really interesting. I also wanted to show you this piece because it's like one of my favorite pieces in the entire collection, just because they're so extraordinary. We have a pair. Can you tell us a little bit about these?
So those are hairpins, kanzashi, and they appear to have images of geisha on them, like photographic images. This sort of thing is popular, like how we would buy celebrity influenced goods today, like favorite geisha, how like people buy their favorite baseball player's jersey or whatever, that sort of thing. Like you want to represent the things you like.
That is so, it's like it's a novelty. It's a
yeah, it's a
novelty, and
novelty, you know, souvenirs, things like
it's
that.
amazing. They're so incredible. They are like a silk gauze, and they have a photographic print on them, and then they're hand colored, and the sticks are black lacquered wood, and they're delicate and an amazing survival, if you ask me, because they are truly delicate. And I just think that they just speak to me in some way that's like these images from the past that somebody thought enough of to wear or to market and to wear in their coiffure. So I just wanted to highlight the geisha in this because it just seems so I don't know, they're so special to me. But so now tell us, before we have to wrap up, tell us about how you came to take this personal journey towards becoming a certified kimono dresser.
Yeah, it has been a journey. Yeah, so a little over 15 years ago, I started learning about kimono just because I had the interest. I think what originally fascinated me about it is, first of all, I'm a huge textile nerd. So just the textiles and the way that the fabrics are created is always something that was very interesting to me. And just the breadth of Japanese textiles. Obviously, it's a country that really appreciates traditional arts. So that appealed to me. I did my undergraduate thesis. Basically, I created like a sculptural collection of garments that combined fabrics from Japan and from the United States into these kind of hybridized pieces that incorporated elements of Japanese street fashion, which is something I'm also super interested in. So it started from kind of like a textile, academic kind of place. And, you know, there's certain things that you can read about as much as you want in a book, but it's hard to really grasp the practicality of it until you really try it yourself. So at a certain point, I also do costume design. I work in the film industry doing costumes. So I had been asked to do several short films that involved kimono. And I really wanted to make sure that I was, you know, upholding the integrity of the traditional dress. So, you know, I started seeking out courses that I could take to learn in a more practical manner, like how to physically dress, because you can read about it, you know, and it'll only tell you so much, right? There's so many
there's
things
book learning and then there's book learning, and then there's the hands-on experience that illuminates that book learning. So
totally. So I mean, you know, if I could go back and redesign all those shorts, I would love to at this point, but you know, water under the bridge. Anyway, so I started looking for something I could learn from. And ended up through like a chain of like emailing multiple people who referred me on to other people to Yamano. So I started taking classes with my teacher, Tomoko Sensei. Hi, Tomoko. She's in Pasadena. And it's like a multi kind of level. Also, that's the big sensei. That's
oh, I'm so sorry.
Yoshimoto Sensei. That's okay. Yeah, so I took, you know, the beginning course and it was awesome. So I was like, all right, I'll take the intermediate course. And then I got the opportunity they have the advanced course, which basically at the end of the advanced course, you are fully licensed. You can teach if you want to, and, you know, basically work as a professional dresser. And it was, you know, a big step. I think it maybe took about 4 years to finish all of my coursework for schools, you know, while I was working full time as well. So it's mostly weekends. I would go after work to take class. But yeah,
but you know, human. You're super
crazy. It was crazy. But yeah, so I, you know, after all that time, finally finished all the classes. There's a big exam at the end where, you know, the head of the school comes from Japan and watches you as you're doing your practical test. It's very nerve-wracking. But yeah, 2018, I got my license, and it was a big achievement.
a tremendous achievement. A tremendous achievement. And I do want to bring it full circle. I'm going to show this photo of you.
Yes.
And
so that is Sueko Oshimoto. So she's the head of Yamano, Southern California. And she actually owns her own business, Kimono SK, which is based in North Hollywood. So they do kimono dressing and photography. But when I worked on Westworld season 2, they brought me in to help with all of the Japan episodes, Shogun World. So I suggested we bring in Oshimoto Sensei to help as well, because there was just so many people to dress. So she was actually the lead dresser for all of our principal actors, and I would assist her, and also her assistant Kentaro was there as well. So that's a picture of us with the costumes that we worked on Westworld. Designer Sharon Davis. Yeah.
Right. I didn't meet you on this occasion, but this was a couple of years ago for our annual Art of Television Costume Design exhibition. And I remember the day that the sensei came, and she was there with Sharon, and they were getting every detail just right. You know, normally we do a lot of the dressing, but we also understand how culturally specific certain elements of dress can be, and if we get them wrong, we're embarrassed, and we don't want to disrespect anybody. So it was fascinating to have her come in and do those last minute touches for us. And it's another way that we are connected through our love of textiles, through our love of Japanese fashion and history, and also our industries. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy life. And let me tell you, working in the television film industry, especially right about now, has been a very intense and fraught time for you. So I doubly appreciate your generosity in giving us this time and your expertise. And I know it was a whirlwind of history, but I think that you've enlightened us all. So I really want to thank you.
I mean, it's, you know, as you said, twist my arm. Any chance to talk about kimono, I'm super, super excited.
Absolutely. So. And everybody, if you don't know Laura's business, BoroBoro, she's Shop BoroBoro on Instagram. She has a lovely website, amazing things. And I am definitely going to have you come and look at that dressing robe. I want a certified kimono dresser to look at it and help me figure it out. I think that would be a wonderful invitation.
Yeah, we'll have to do a follow-up, like sleuthing Instagram or something.
I think that would be great. Actually, that would be fantastic. Fans. So you heard it here first. We're going to do a little sleuthing something with our dressing room from the 1880s. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and I hope you had a great time too.
Thank you. No, it was super fun. Looking forward to seeing the dressing robe and future adventures.
Fantastic. Thank you. And if anybody missed this, we will be putting it up on our YouTube channel and our Instagram TV. So thank you once again. We want to thank also our audience for joining us, and we will see you for our next FITA Museum collection conversation.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Take care. Have a good weekend. Happy Friday.
Yay, TGIF. Bye.
Bye-bye.